All right, in this explainer, we're going to map out the core theories in the philosophy of mind. This is going to be perfect if you're revising for your A-levels because we're going to see how all the key arguments connect. Okay, so we're going to kick things off with the central puzzle of the mind and body. Then we'll dive into the two main camps, dualism and physicalism. From there, we'll check out the different physicalist strategies, see how functionalism just reframes the whole debate, and then wrap it all up with a big picture map.
Right, first things first, we need to get our heads around the fundamental puzzle that gets this entire debate started, the mind-body problem.
So the big question here isn't whether we have minds. Obviously we do. The real puzzle is what is a mind, and how in the world does it connect to our physical body and our brain? To even start answering that, we need to get a handle on two really important concepts.
So first up, we've got this idea of intentionality. It sounds complicated, but it's just the aboutness of our thoughts. I mean, think about it for a second. How can a bunch of neurons firing in your brain, which is just a physical thing, be about something totally different, like your belief that the sun is shining? That's the core of the puzzle right there.
And the second key concept is qualia. This is all about that private, subjective, what it's like feeling of an experience. You know, the actual sensation of pain, or what it's really like to see the color red. Trying to explain that inner feeling in purely physical terms, well, that is a huge challenge.
Okay, so faced with this puzzle, where do we even start? Well, the most intuitive answer, the one that's been around forever, is dualism. The basic idea? The mind and the body are in two totally separate worlds.
The classic version of this is substance dualism. It claims the mind and body are made of completely different stuff. You've got the body, right? It's physical, it takes up space. And then you have the mind, which is made of completely different, non-physical thinking stuff. And this is where things get really interesting, because you see this classic trade-off. On one hand, substance dualism seems to explain things like qualia really easily. It just says, oh, those are features of the non-physical mind. But in solving one problem, it creates the infamous interaction problem. How on earth does a non-physical ghost pull the levers on the physical machine of your body?
So, to try and get around that really tricky interaction problem, some philosophers came up with property dualism. This is kind of a compromise. It says, look, there's only one kind of stuff in the universe, physical stuff. But that physical stuff can have two totally different kinds of properties. You've got your normal physical properties, and then you've got these special non-physical mental properties, like that feeling of seeing red.
Okay, let's switch gears completely and look at physicalism. This approach just throws that whole dualist picture out the window. For physicalists, it's a unified world where absolutely everything is physical.
And this slide just lays out the central conflict perfectly. Dualism, two kinds of reality. Physicalism, nope, just one. For a physicalist, that's it. The mind, your thoughts, your feelings, all of it is ultimately physical.
Now, a big motivation for physicalism is this principle called Occam's razor, which is basically a fancy way of saying, don't make things more complicated than they need to be. Keep it simple. And physicalism is really appealing because it avoids all this mysterious non-physical soul stuff and fits so much better with our modern scientific picture of the world.
But here's the thing, just saying everything is physical doesn't solve the problem. It just changes the question. Now you have to explain how the mind can be physical. And that leads to a few very different strategies.
So, you've got three main plays here, and they get progressively more wild. You start with behaviorism, which says the mind is just what the body does. Then you move to identity theory, which says the mind is the brain, and you end up with eliminativism, which claims our whole concept of the mind is just wrong.
So behaviorism's big idea is to just get rid of the inner world. Sounds crazy, right? But for a behaviorist, being in pain isn't some private internal feeling. It's just the stuff you do, the wincing, the groaning, the saying, ouch. It's all about what we can observe from the outside.
Okay, but the big problem with behaviorism, as you can probably guess, is that it just seems to ignore our inner lives. So, along comes type identity theory. It brings that inner world back into the picture, but says, hey, it's not mysterious at all. The theory is simple. Every type of mental state, like pain, is literally the exact same thing as a type of brain state, like your C fibers firing. It's not just correlated, it's identical. Pain is a brain state. End of story.
And then we have eliminativism, which is by far the most radical view on the table. It basically says that our whole way of talking about the mind, using words like beliefs and desires, what philosophers call folk psychology, is just Wrong. It's a busted pre-scientific theory. And the prediction is that one day neuroscience will get so good that we'll just stop using these old words and replace them with something much more accurate.
Okay, so we've looked at dualism, and we've looked at the different flavors of physicalism. But what if they were all barking up the wrong tree? That's where this third major theory, functionalism, comes in. It argues that everyone was asking the completely wrong question from the very start.
For literally centuries, the entire debate was obsessed with this one question of substance. What is the mind made of? Is it some non-physical soul stuff, or is it just plain old physical brain stuff? That was seen as the central question.
And this is where functionalism makes a really clever pivot. It says, hey, let's just stop asking what the mind is made of. That's not the important question.
So if we're not asking what it's made of, what are we asking? Functionalism says we should define a mental state by its function, by what it does. It's about its causal role in the whole system. You know, how it links sensory inputs to other thoughts, to what you actually do. And the really key idea here is that what it's made from, it just doesn't matter.
Okay, this poison analogy makes it all click into place. Think about the word poison. What makes something a poison? It's not what it's made of, right? Arsenic and cyanide are totally different chemicals. It's a poison because of what it does. It causes harm. Functionalism says mental states are exactly like that. Pain is just anything that plays the role of pain, whether that's happening in a human brain, an alien brain, or even a super advanced computer.
All right, I know that was a super quick run through of some huge ideas. So let's pull all of this together into one big map. This should really help you see how everything fits together for your revision.
So here it is, the whole debate on one page. You can clearly see that big first split between dualism and physicalism. You see how property dualism is sort of a compromise in the dualist camp. Then under physicalism, you've got those three different strategies we talked about: behaviorism, identity theory, and the really radical one, eliminativism. And then you see functionalism, kind of sitting off to the side, because it completely changes the question from what is the mind to what does the mind do?